Does anybody want to know what happened to Molly? Am I the only one? Okay, so my story started in this building while most kids were at summer camp and going down water slides. I was here at Sam's Wines and Liquors. This picture was taken, I think, in the 60s, although I wasn't born then. It was probably about 2 blocks from the worst housing project in the United States. I would spend my days there in the summer helping my dad out. Over time, we moved into a bigger building in 1996. I think for a while we were the largest grossing wine store in the country. We certainly had a real big operation, very high volume, sadly not enough margin. So here we are today. I sold this company in 2007. Now I work with groups of people on a multitude of different things. But for today's presentation, what I want you to think about is that, and I've tried to add this up and I'll show you my math, right? 17 years full-time at Sam's, 49 weeks a year, let's say, 4 calls a day. And I really think I've sat through up to 19,000 sales calls. So what I'm sharing with you today is in a very encapsulated way to go about it, is just what I think works and what I think does not work. And we'll form them in questions. You'll see what I mean in a moment. 6 words. Now, I want to give you a caveat, right? You're all experienced people. There's nothing I'm going to say today that's going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe, he said that. That's amazing. I've never heard that before. You've heard in the selling arena, you've heard all of it before. But the question is, are you doing it? Will you do it? Do you have the ability to do it? Is it interesting to you to do it? And ultimately, do you want to be successful in your endeavors? We've had a lot of great presentations here today, and a lot of people have a similar theme, and that's it's hard to get attention from retailers. It's hard to get attention from distributors. So when you actually sit in front of a buyer or somebody that's very important to you, I want to make sure you execute. So that's what today is all about. It starts with mindset. I'm going to speak a little bit about mindset, but not from a positive mental attitude framework, more from a framework of what happens in your mind when you're not positive. Look, it gets hard. There's doors that get slammed, and I want you to know what's happening, because for a long time I didn't know what was happening when I thought negatively. This was instilled in me. From the age of 13, I was one of the youngest finishers of the Chicago Marathon back in the day, and I really learned about mindset at that point. Okay, so the concept is called train your thoughts, and for that I'll introduce my son Josh to you. Josh is, in this picture, he's probably about 17 years old. His dream, his passion, the only thing he thinks about is becoming a commercial pilot. And what's interesting about Josh is like flying like he is the man. I mean, he studies every aviation occurrence that has ever happened. He has studied. He's a student of the science, and he's very bright when it comes to that. Yet he has a learning disability, and he has ADD, which he got from me. And he thinks, in some respects, that he's not intelligent. So when he was younger, he'd come home and he'd say to me, "Dad, I'm this. Dad, I'm that." And often what we would do is we would laugh. We would laugh when he'd say, "Dad, I'm dumb." And we would laugh because it wasn't true. It wasn't true at all. He was intelligent, but he was telling himself the opposite. So what I want you to think about is you all have in your minds a file cabinet. You all have a file cabinet in your mind, and in that file cabinet is the memory of everything that's ever happened to you. You decide what to call forward on a daily basis. And since 85% of what's happening in your mind is happening subconsciously, it is imperative to make the right choices. So when Josh is saying, "I am an idiot, I'm stupid," when he was saying things like that, what was happening in his mind subconsciously, a mad dash to the back, a mad dash to bring back every memory to support what he said. The time when he couldn't read in class with everybody else. He was going to resource from kindergarten through 12, K through 12, to get reading help. The time that maybe there was a pretty girl standing outside the resource room and he didn't want to go in there. Or the time he said a word wrong and people laughed. That's what he brought back. So in your endeavors, what I want you to know is it gets a heck of a lot easier When you lay that foundation, your mind is firing at all times. You are regenerating these nerve endings and what is happening at all times. So if you think, no way, I'm not going to make the placement. By the way, I see so many sales professionals that are woefully thinking it's not going to happen right before they walk into an account. They're dead. Subconsciously, they won't come up with it. The creativity they need will not be there. So you choose that path, but I would be remiss, in my 6 words, if I didn't highlight mindset. Motivate. So we all have a part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. Everybody go like this for a second. It's right here. Everybody go like this. Everybody that wants to, go like this. 5 of you. Okay, so this is your prefrontal cortex, okay? Demonstration over. And now, here's what's happening, right? When you go in to call on an account, you have just a few seconds to get that person engaged, to get that person listening to you. And when they're truly listening to you, you are getting to this part of their brain where all the heavy lifting takes place. The question is, are we getting there? Here's what I don't want to see. I don't want to see you think you're clicking on all cylinders and they're not even listening. I'd rather you walk in and then be all frazzled and you're able to say, maybe this isn't a good time or maybe I need to recalibrate my strategy. The worst part about it is when you think you're doing well and they're not listening. That's because you have not gotten to this part of the brain. So how do you get to that part of the brain? The ultimate question is, are we generating interest, and will our attempts to generate interest overcome their hesitation? I'm here to tell you something you already know. Every retailer says, I want new and exciting, but they only want that to a degree. They don't want all the new and exciting that you guys have. And it has nothing to do with what you're selling. It has everything to do with the fact that there's so many of you. So the gravity is against you. That's why this is so critical. It's imperative that if there may be reason to hesitate based upon whatever you're selling, that you address it right away to get to this part of the brain. And we'll talk a little bit later about asking questions, because I'm a fanatic about asking questions, about setting up your sales call with questions so that when you go there, you know something about the customer. Look, here's the problem. You're taught in selling, it's need-based, right? You have to find a need. Most people walk in to sell something, and the only need there is they need to sell it. It's not a good way to start. One of the things that I do is I film sales professionals presenting. And then we load it into the computer and we look at it together to come up with better sales strategies. And I had last week out in Seattle, somebody was selling Goose Island in this film role play situation. I don't recall what kind of Goose Island it was, but there was a story behind it. And the story was that they had sold it for $125 a barrel. They could not sell it to the distributor. Then they knocked the price down to $55 a barrel. They sold it. And then they were trying to take the price back up to $115 a barrel. But when you have that kind of tumult with a brand, you got to address it. You can't just let it lay there. You got to address it. So how do you address it in a way that motivates the customer to overcome the resistance they already have? The gravity that is implicit in this setting. How do you address it? Maybe you say something like, before you say anything, I know you're looking at this and thinking, why the heck would he bring this back in here? Just give me a few minutes to show you why this situation is vastly different now. Okay? Is that a perfect, interest-getting statement? Probably not. But it's better than acting like nothing ever happened. So you've got to get to this part of the brain. Not motivating in terms of yourself, that's mindset, but motivating the customer to care. Differentiate. Mindset. Motivate, differentiate. What makes you and your company worth doing business with? What makes your brands different? So I have a couple examples, right? Because I think in general, and especially when you're relying on a distributor sales force, look, I know you guys know your stuff inside and out, right? But when you're talking about a distributor sales force or even another sales force or brand ambassadors or whomever, they don't always know why it makes sense to carry the brand. They don't always know that. And often they come with the same tired approach that, quite frankly, is not going to work so well. Here's some examples. This is a client of mine that sells Pacific Coast cider. It's a cider. There's a lot of ciders. It's a growing category. They're a fifth-generation winemaker. Blah, blah, blah. It's made with wine. It's the only one. It's the only one. That's your point of differentiation if you're selling a product like this. Don't talk about the fifth generation. I forget the name of I think it was a Teresa, I think, this morning. We talked about family, right? I filmed this team making sales presentations. Every single one of them started with a fifth generation winemaker. Who cares? They're not the only one. It's not a point of differentiation. It's a nice story, Kendra, if we can roll it into one, or Molly. Never mind. But you have to have a way. I filmed a team selling this Robert Mondavi private selection that's aged in a bourbon barrel. It's kind of neat. It doesn't matter that it's Robert Mondavi. Look, all that's backwards stuff, right? Quality, their private selection, good wine, kind of pricey, the label looks nice. None of that really matters in terms of generating interest and differentiating the product. It's aged in a bourbon barrel. Come on. So we can mention the other features, but I'm holding the bottle, I'm getting it into the hands of the buyer or whomever, and I'm saying, you know what's really unique about this? We've never seen this before. This is the only one. It's aged in a bourbon barrel. So that, tie it to a benefit, so that consumers will buy into the craft appeal of the product. And from yesterday, P&F, and I think the ladies are still here, I saw them earlier, and I spoke to them afterwards. I hope they don't mind me using them as an example. I tasted their wine, it was great. Their wine was great, and we talked about the presentation, and it reminded me that a couple weeks ago I had a role play, a filming situation where somebody was selling wines from Slovenia, and they were tripping all over what they were saying about this wine. It was more of I wouldn't say a discount, but a value brand, we could say. And the one thing they didn't say was that it's made so close to Italy that it has a lot of the same characteristics of an Italian wine, but it's half the price. So I walk in there and I'm talking about the country and I'm talking about the value you can get just because of where it's located. And it's good wine. I tried the wine, it's good wine. I like the packaging, I mean, it seemed great. But I'm going somewhere else to try to differentiate from everything else they're seeing that day. Look, they're gonna see 10, 12 people like you in a given day. Who's the one they're gonna listen to? The one who generates that interest, that excitement up front. That's not easy. So we always have to ask, are we differentiating? Are we preparing? Now, when I talk about preparation, what I want to share is are we preparing for the day or planning for the call? But I want you to think about it this way. If you are not preparing to ask one intelligent question that makes you seem smarter than you are, that gets your customer going like this, or saying, gee, I never thought of that. You've not planned for the call properly, because I have to tell you that in the ups and downs of the call, or in the nervousness of the call, or the buyer taking phone calls and stepping out and checking his or her phone and whatever they're doing, you may forget to ask that one question. And if you walk out of there and you say to the person you're traveling with, or maybe even say to yourself, did I learn anything about that customer? And the answer is no, go back in. Because anytime you can tie a question you've asked to what you're selling, you have made it so much easier. If, going back to the Slovenian wine, if you can say to the buyer, even to email the buyer, if you can somehow get an understanding of where their interest is, then you can walk back in and say, hey, we were talking last week, or when I called you, or over email about value brands, and how you felt that value brands didn't have a lot of character and there wasn't enough variety. It was all, yellowtail and whatever. And you would suggest, wow, if I could have more value brands that were great wines where people would open the bottle of wine, they'd say, oh my God, this is awesome. How much did this cost? When you can generate that kind of interest, you're halfway home. But I have to tell you, folks, it doesn't happen during the call. It doesn't happen during the call. It happens before that. It's part of the planning process. What do I mean by the defining moment? Whatever objection you may get, whatever you think you're going to get. Now, when you're seeing somebody for the first time, you may not know what the objection is going to be, but you certainly can take a pretty good guess at it, or the question, or the resistance, or the hesitation. Whatever that is, you can certainly take a good guess at it. And there's really no excuse not to know what the comeback is going to be. And I don't mean to say comeback, it's like it's adversarial. What your response is, what kind of thoughtful response you're going to have. But this is the stuff that takes some planning ahead of time, right? So what's our mindset, right? Are we motivating the customer to take action? Are we really differentiating our products? One more point on that, differentiating our products. I've had situations where I've sat with a client with 3 bottles of wine in the table in the center of a conference room with 4 or 5 people, and all we've done that entire day and nothing else, all we've done is talk about what makes the brands different, better. What is that point of differentiation, competitive advantage? And we don't leave the room until we have it, till it makes sense. That's the kind of analysis that I recommend. The reason I put a notebook up here is because one of the strongest things you can do, one of the best things you can do is you can start the day with a 10-minute planning session of some sort. If you can do it 5 days a week, awesome. If you could do it 2 days a week for 5 minutes, 3 days a week for 10 minutes, 12 minutes, it doesn't matter. Just get in the habit of doing it. And I'm going to tell you why. We all have something called the reticular activation system in our heads. You know how when you buy a car and then you see that car everywhere for like the next month? Anybody have that feeling, right? That's your reticular activation system at work. I live in Chicago and I drive the Kennedy Expressway. I can see the car I just bought 8 lanes over in the other direction. That's what the mind is doing. So if I sit in the morning and I write down a client's name, a customer's name, or I write down a brand or a market or a certain package, it doesn't matter. If I write something down, then what happens is throughout that day, I'm going to get ideas. I'm going to get ideas. But you can't get that feeling, you can't simulate that feeling if you don't do that in the morning. And it doesn't matter what comes out. It doesn't matter what comes out when you brainstorm. It matters the ideas that come to you as the day progresses. So that's why it's so important. Investigate. This is Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul author. Some of you may be familiar with him. I saw him one time, and it was like some leadership event that I went to, and he saw me speak. And he gave me some guidance that was shocking to me, but not to my wife, strangely. He tells me that when I present, and you guys are gonna be like, oh yeah, look at that guy now. When I present, he said I looked mad. He said I looked mad, and you know, you take feedback, right? What are the 2 words when you get feedback? Thank you. So I said, thank you. Can you explain? He said I was like a big, intimidating guy. I didn't know what the heck he was talking about. But he told me that I have so much passion and I have so much energy, like a lot of energy. It's not just Monster, okay? A lot of energy. He said that it could be too much. So I went home that day and I told my wife, she's like, I've been trying to tell you that for 25 years. But I was at the Admirals Club in Chicago a couple weeks later, and I was approaching the desk. Now, I was going to Chattanooga, Tennessee, which I think is a great city. All the things that are important to me when I travel, a client that I like, car rental in the airport, and a decent restaurant within walking distance of the hotel. I'm an easy guy. So I was going to Chattanooga, we had all that, and I approached the counter, and the lady says to me, she goes, what's wrong? I mean, seriously, I was like wearing a baseball hat. I mean, it was a great day. She's like, what's wrong? And I said, what do you mean? What's wrong? Tell me, help me. She's like, you look like you're in a hurry. And that's what I knew I had a problem. Now, I tell you this for two reasons. A, it's important to be vulnerable. You gotta spell it out. I mean, it was kind of an upsetting time for me. And I'll tell you why it was upsetting, because I was 47 years old when I got that advice. I've been this spastic mess my whole life. So I'm thinking, nobody told me. Like, no, I think my wife was trying to tell me, but it was a little harder to hear. But nobody told me, and I'm like, oh my God, how many people have I pissed off in my life? Like, what's the matter with that guy? Gone to see somebody, at a sales meeting, flown to their city, and they're like, leave for the airport, please. Like, I mean, how many? And it upset me. Now, the reason I tell you this is because I think the absolute number one thing you can do, however you do it, is find out what people think of you. Find out what people think of you so you can make those changes. So you can enhance them. Be strong, be vulnerable. Take it, it's not a big deal. You know why? Because if you're the only guy, right? We all know the guy in the high school class who thought he was a great guy, everybody loved him, yet everybody hated him, right? That guy, right? And that's called cognitive dissonance. That means that you think one thing and everybody else thinks something else. So you ask. You say, what can I do better? How do I come across to you? What are you taking from this discussion? Am I being clear enough? Ask, because if you don't, the joke is on you. And I can't be any more emphatic about that with you. Find out what people think of the various elements of your presentation style. It's personal and professional. You gotta figure out if you're getting this guy or this guy. It's important to know. I try now, when I meet somebody for the first time, I was giving them some vibe. Like I was like, my heart would say, hey, nice to meet you, because I like people. And my head and my face was like, get away from me. It was like a total disconnect. Well, you know what, I work on it now. So I think we all have things we can work on. Now, I also want you to think about the questions you ask your clients, customers, because it is imperative on each call, and this is a planning thing, guys, on each call, and the people that work for you and the people that go out in the market and sell, it is imperative that they know how to gain information. I'm going to repeat this one thing I said earlier. You can go back. You can go back to people and sell them something when you have a better idea of what makes them tick. So this is I'll have some resources for you at the end, but I think I'm getting some kind of sign that I didn't know there would be signs, and I lost track of time. But so here's my last word: simplify. And what I want you to think about is highlighting 3 or 4 points that are important. But I want you to think of benefits. And if you see the phrase that I put up there, so that. And here's what I mean by that: the wine is fruity. So that. Don't say anything in the line of features without some statement that ties it to a benefit. Please, don't underestimate this. They say you can lead a horse to water, and these horses, you got to make them drink the water, because they don't always get what you're saying. They don't always get that. They don't always get what you're trying to highlight. So you want to make sure you're doing that. Aligned with customers' goals and economic situation, right? What are you saying? What are you presenting? Great question is, how are you evaluated, Mr. Buyer? That's a great question. And are you specifying next steps? Do you know how the buyer is evaluated? Start there. The money question: if the customer can't easily discern a sizable gap between doing what the sales pro wants him or her to do and doing nothing, right? A sizable gap between what I want you to do and doing nothing. Guess what I'm going to do? Nothing. So make it easy for people to understand. Mindset. Prepare. Are we prepared? Are we motivating our customer to take action? Are we investigating both ourselves and other people? Do we differentiate our products? Do we really take a good long look at it? And am I simplifying the presentation. If you have any questions about selling in the market, and just feel free to reach out to me. There's a card, like on a rack card. It's over there in the corner on one of those tables. And I have a lot of resources that I can put you in touch with. I'm happy to help. I know we went kind of fast with this. I have some resources that will help you, written resources that I'll make available to you. But if you can keep these elements in mind, I think you're going to have a lot of success when you finally get face-to-face with the customer. Thank you.